So you just spent thousands of dollars fixing up your rental property, and now you found a great tenant, and now you think you can just sit back and relax for the next year, right? Well, maybe, maybe not. A few months later, you get a call from your tenant that says, I've taken a new job, it's cross country, I couldn't pass it up, and I need to break the lease. Okay, so now you're a little stressed out. You don't know what to do. You just have been in there a few months. Now you have to do it all over again. So in this video, you'll find out if this situation happens to you, or if your tenant has to break the lease, what are your options, what can you do, and how can you protect yourself so that you can lose the least amount of money possible. For the best landlord tips and tricks, subscribe to our channel and click on the bell below so that you'll be notified right away when we post new videos each and every Wednesday. So do you have clear language in your lease that spells out exactly what happens if the tenant breaks the lease early? In all of the leases that we use with our company and our owners, we make it very clear exactly what the lease break fees are, what the penalties are, what the tenant is responsible for, so that if and when, and the situation does come up fairly frequently because people are transient, we live in a very transient area, and people have to leave earlier than they plan. So when it happens, we just spell it out very clearly so that there's no question about who pays for what. There's nothing gray area, it's not wishy-washy, super duper clear. So stay right here because I'm going to show you some language that you can use in your lease to help protect you, to make sure that if your tenant breaks the lease, it doesn't cost you thousands. So let's look at some options. Basically, there are two options. One, you can tell this tenant that they have to stay, and two, you can tell them, okay, you can break the lease, but here are the terms. So let's talk about option number one. To force them to stay. Well, we all know that that's not really going to work. You can't force somebody to do something they're not going to do. If they're going to take a great job or they have some other reason they have to leave, they're going to leave. So forcing them to stay and trying to make them pay is just a wasted effort. It's not going to happen. So that is not the option of choice. Option number two is really the best option, and you just need to make sure that you have the other pieces spelled out clearly. So option number two is let them leave with a penalty. So here are some of the penalties you should consider adding to your lease. First of all, you want to charge a lease break fee. This is pretty standard. If somebody breaks a lease, there's a lease break fee. Not an unusual thing to have in a lease. This can be a flat dollar amount, it can be a percentage of the lease, but it has to be something reasonable. Again, we always look at this in the eyes of the courts. If the tenant says, no way, I'm not paying that, and there's a battle and you go to court, what's really going to stand up? So in our area, we don't really see lease break fees much more than a month's rent. We charge a month's rent if it's before 6 months, or halfway through the lease term rather. After halfway through the lease term, we would charge a half a month's penalty for breaking the lease. So somewhere in there is what you should consider. And again, just look at what's customary in your area, ask around, ask other real estate agents, property managers, and see what's pretty standard. But make sure you have something in there because you've got to go through a lot more work now when the tenant leaves early. So you should be compensated for that. The other language that you want to make sure you have in there, besides a lease break fee, is the language about the fact that the tenant is going to continue to pay the rent, the utilities, and whatever upkeep is necessary on the property until a new tenant starts the lease. So let's say they have to move anyway. They need to make sure to keep the utilities on. They need to make sure the lawn is mowed. If it's wintertime, make sure that whatever measures are needed, like snow removal or whatever, that is all done by the tenant. They still have to upkeep the property, even if they don't live there, or pay someone to do it. But once you found a new tenant and that new tenant has moved in, then the first tenant doesn't need to pay anymore and you have a new tenant. The other thing that the tenant, and we have this in our lease, is some prorated cost of finding the new tenant. So in our area, it's customary to put rentals into the multiple listing service. Other agents will show it the listing, often bring the tenant, and we pay them a portion of the listing commission. So if there is a cost associated with relisting the property and securing a new tenant, you can charge the old tenant who's breaking the lease some portion of that cost to re-rent it. So you just need to spell that out clearly, make sure everybody understands exactly what it is, and then charge them for it, since you're doing it much earlier than you would have expected. But one thing to remember too, when you charge the tenant for re-renting the property, you as the landlord have a responsibility to actively market the property. So if the tenant says they're leaving and you just sit on it and you don't do anything, and then months and months go by, the tenant's paying, they can come back to you and say, look, landlord, you haven't done anything. You haven't listed the property for rent. You haven't done anything to actively show that you are marketing the property and trying to get a new tenant. So you have to make a very good faith effort to get it rented. Otherwise, that could come back on you. So we'd love to hear about any specific lease clauses that you have, that you've used in your leases that have worked well for you. Share those in the notes below. So no one wants any stress or conflict or anything unnecessary, but life happens, and sometimes people have to move sooner than they planned. Not because they're trying to get out of something, but sometimes they just have to. A great opportunity comes up, maybe they get a divorce, who knows? But sometimes they just have to move. So you just want to make sure that everyone is protected. And that's why it's really important to include language about lease breaks in your lease, spelled out very clearly so that everybody understands it up front and you avoid any conflict and confusion down the road. So now hopefully you have some language surrounding lease breaks that you can use in your next rental agreement. But also there are other things that are really important to make sure that you include in your lease. So check out our other video about 5 key essential clauses that you should consider adding to your lease agreement. I've put the link below. If you like this video, please subscribe to our channel and share it with landlords who you think might benefit from this sort of information. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.